We welcome you all to the today's seminar on precision oncology series once again. And we have one of the very important and exciting lectures today given by Dr. Rohit Raghunath Ranade. The topic, as you all know, is about the how NGS has played an important role in HRR testing. Dr. Rohit will give us an elaborate discussion on that. So to brief you about Dr. Rohit, Dr. Rohit is a gynec oncologist with more than 12 years of experience, and he has a specialty in robotic surgeries in gynecological malignancies, aggressive cytoreductive surgeries in ovarian cancer, HIPEC surgeries, HIPEC in ovarian cancers, and pseudomyxoma peritoneum, advanced laparoscopy in gynec cancers, colposcopy, and PEPAC. He is the second person in India to be awarded an MCH in gynec oncology. And he did his education, MBBS and his MS from Government Medical College, Maharashtra. Then MCH from India's premier institutes, that is Tata Memorial Center in Mumbai. Dr. Ranade also has a fellowship in gynecological oncology from one of the prestigious institutions in the world, that is Royal Women's Hospital, Melbourne in Australia. As subsequently, he also had another fellowship in HIPEC and peritoneal surface malignancies from Lyon South Hospital in France, and a fellowship in robotic and laparoscopy in gynecology from Center Oscar Lambret in France. He is also a member of Gynec Oncological Society of India, Society of Peritoneal Surface Oncologists, Karnataka Medical Council, International Gynec Cancer Society, and Asia Pacific Association on Gynec Endoscopists, European Society for Medical Oncology, and he's also a member of Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Over to you, sir, and we are very happy to have you today to listen to you on this wonderful session which we are going to have today. Most exciting session and a lot of knowledge and insights that we are going to gain on pre-analytical, what kind of samples and how we are going to deal with BRCA and other HRR mutations in breast and ovarian cancers and other cancers which are in pipeline, where we have a role for targeted therapy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Vidya, for the kind introduction. And at the outset, I thank Forbos Care for this kind invite. It's absolute pleasure to talk on a subject which is very close to my heart. And primary reason is if you ask me one or two cancers where there has been a paradigm shift in how we are treating our patients, breast and ovarian cancers are one. And primarily it is because since we know that there is a lot of genetic component which is associated with that. And so that's why as oncologists or clinicians, it is very, very important that we make use of all these facilities and do these tests in our patients so that it will help us manage them better, at the same time improve their quality of life. At the outset, just a brief about what is actually genome and what is genomics. You all must be surprised that how come a surgeon is talking about a genome and a genomics, but that's how oncology has evolved. It's definitely evolved from somewhere like where we are subjecting each patient, like all patients of ovarian cancer were subjected to same management, but now that's not the case. One size doesn't fit all. More and more we are going into personalized medicine, we are going into precision medicine, and A patient may not behave like what a B patient behaves. And so it's very, very important that all the oncologists, whether you are a surgeon, a medical oncologist, or a radiation oncologist, one should know what is the basis of cancer and basis of the disease that you're treating. So what is exactly genome and genomics? So basically in the fields of molecular biology and genetics, basically genome is what all the genetic material an organism has. It mainly consists of a DNA, and the genome includes both the genes and the non-coding DNA, as well as the mitochondrial DNA and also the chloroplast DNA, which is not for mammals. And the study of genome is called as genomics. So basically, we would have learned all of this in the first year in anatomy, where we knew that there was a nucleus. Nucleus consists of DNA, and then there are basically introns, promoter genes, and exons, which are all responsible for how the tumors occur, or how is the entire human being develops. So actually, the ovarian cancer is one cancer which has gone a paradigm shift since the Human Genome Project, and the code has been found out, and we exactly know now that there are what are the genes or what are the exons which are responsible for particular cancers. Now, how do we interrogate the genome? The answer is sequencing. So sequencing is something which is going to tell us more about genome. So what is exactly sequencing? Sequencing is basically just a method so as to detect the order of a nucleotide sequence in the given genome. Now, what is NGS? So NGS basically means that you are sequencing thousands to millions of DNA molecules simultaneously, and it gives an excellent output, and there is a lot of capability so as you can sequence multiple individuals at the same time. And again, in today's world, NGS is an important and irreplaceable tool in genomics, is quite well proven. And so because of NGS, we know that we can actually sequence what genes are responsible, what mutations are responsible for a particular cancer. And all of these means that there is a lot of growth of personalized medicine or precision medicine, what I was talking about. And all of them has facilitated into excellent targeted therapy development, and thus improving survivals of our patients. Because as an oncologist, what matters are only two things. One is how much is your patient going to survive, and at the same time, what is the quality of life. So that is something which is very, very important. And all of this, because the NGS techniques are available in India, we no longer have to depend on overseas for these methods. And all of this means that it's a reduced cost to the end consumer, which is our patient. Now, basically, how does the workflow of NGS work? So I'm not an expert on this, but Dr. Vidya would be a good person to talk on this. So basically, the DNA, in layman terms, it is broken into small like fragments, which is known as which is done in the library. Then there is something called as enrichment, and then there is a PCR, which forms the basis of the NGS sequencing. And then comes the second part, which is the informatics, where actually you know what genes are mutated, and that is how you get the final report. Now, so now why it is important for all of us to know about the NGS? So what are basically the genetic markers that are covered in NGS? So they can be variations or mutations. So again, as we know that mutations can be of two types. One is inherited mutations, that is which go from one generation to another. They're also known as germline mutations. Or the second mutations are somatic mutations, which actually occur in the individual patient. They are sporadic. We don't know what is the reason for them. And they can be either bystander mutations, or they can be driver and actionable mutations. Now, actionable mutations can be basically single nucleotide variants. So where just a single nucleotide is altered in the DNA sequence. Most common type of mutation where T thymine is substituted by C. Again, they can be insertions or deletions. So either a nucleotide can be substituted or it can be deleted in the DNA. So that can give rise to various mutations. Again, important is a tumor burden, tumor mutation burden. So it basically measures the mutation load in the tumor sample, and it is recognized by the immune system for inciting an anti-tumor response. This is how immunotherapy works. Recently, we know that Keytruda, though it has been approved for non-small cell lung cancer, but Keytruda is also now approved for metastatic recurrent endometrial cancer in certain cases. Now, microsatellite instability forms an important part of colon cancer as well as some parts of uterine cancer. So these are basically hypermutable phenotypes which are caused by loss of DNA mismatch repair activity, just thus increasing the susceptibility to develop the colonic cancers, and the uterine cancers. Now, what are the basic advantages of the next generation sequencing? So because of NGS, we can do a parallel sequencing capability. There is a single input of DNA or RNA which is required, and you can screen multiple genes in multiple samples. It gives us a better picture of tumor heterogeneity. Now, it can lead to quantitative and a sensitive detection of genomic aberrations. All of these means that the cost per sequencing will come down. And obviously, with more and more research and more improvements in technology, all of these means that the technique is going to get much better as the time progresses. Now, NGS basically provides optimal results with better treatment planning options for the clinicians, which is very important. Now, this is just a comparison of the different modalities that are available for diagnosis of various mutations. Now, you can see the commonly used, which is known as IHC, can only diagnose a protein expression alteration. While if you take a hybrid capture based NGS, you can diagnose deletions, you can diagnose fusions, even novel fusions, splice variants, and MSI also can be diagnosed by NGS. While FISH and the qualitative PCR can diagnose only few deletions. So all in all, an NGS is something which is very important. So one test can give you a lot of information. Now, coming to again, why is cancer caused? Now, cancer is basically normally it's basically when your cells lose the ability of stopping to divide. Like for example, the normal cells are replaced by the abnormal cells. Now the abnormal cells basically multiply. So now these abnormal cells, they stop the ability to divide. This is because of the lack of stop codon, and that is why the cells continue to divide, and that is when you form tumor. Now we know that the cancer spreads by angiogenesis or a blood spread, or it spreads by lymphatic spread, or it can spread by local tissue as well. So basically, in all types of cancer, most of the body cells began to divide without stopping, and then they spread into the surrounding tissues, which is known as metastatic. And obviously, any part of the body can develop into malignancy. So again, there are only few cancers where we definitely know causative agents. Like for example, we definitely know that tobacco chewing or tobacco in any form causes more common cause of head and neck cancer. Smoking is definitely a contributory factor for lung cancer. We know that cervical cancer, 70% to 80% of cervical cancers are caused by a human papilloma virus. So these are only a few instances where we definitely know that the causative agent is XYZ. But there are a lot of other factors where the causative agent is not known. Like for example, no one knows why pancreatic cancer occurs. No one knows why ovarian cancer occurs. Not completely. Again, roughly 10% of cancers are caused because of infection, 20% is because of occupational hazard, and 30% is probably because of diet, especially the cancers of the gut, mainly the stomach, the colon, and the rectum are supposed to be in the chances are increased because of a particular diet. Now, what are the different types of mutations? So mutation is basically a change that occurs in our DNA sequence, which is either because of mistakes by which the DNA is copied as a result or as a result of environmental factors. Now, these are different types of mutations. So all of us have studied this in our anatomies. It might be a deletion where a particular codon is deleted. It can be a duplication where the same codon replica is created. It could be inversion, or it could be insertion, or it could be translocation. So these are different types of mutations which can happen. Now, this is something which is very important and has got a lot of clinical sense in oncological practice. Now, what is the difference between germline or familial and somatic? Now, in layman terms or in very simple terms, when a mutation is passed from generation to generation and which gives rise to a particular cancer in the family, it is called as a germline or familial. The most famous germline mutation is the BRCA1 and 2 mutation. We definitely know that having a BRCA mutation increases the person's risk of getting a breast cancer by up to 80% and ovarian cancer up to 40%. BRCA is definitely heritable. It is hereditary. Now, it is present in all the body cells For example, 5 to 10% in breast cancer and about 20 to 30% in ovarian cancer. And if you want to detect a germline mutation, it is important that you send the blood of the patient. Now, coming to the second, which is the somatic mutations. Now, these are mutations which are not hereditary. That is, they occur in only the particular generation and which have been acquired in the course of life due to either lifestyle, environmental exposures, or toxins, or they are just spontaneous mutations. They are essentially non-hereditary. Now, they are present in not all the body cells. So they are essentially present in only the tumor cells. Again, 95% of them are present in the breast cancer and 80% in ovarian cancer. Now, that is why, because they are not present in all body cells, if you send blood and you ask the lab to detect a somatic mutation, then that is not possible. So it's important that to detect somatic mutation, one should send the tissue sample. That is, tissue or the tumor sample is something which is very, very important. Now, why are we talking about all of this? What is hereditary cancer and risk? Now, these are basically variations or mutations in the genes which you may have inherited from your parents, and the variations are likely to be pathogenic, benign, or unknown significance, and may attribute to either low, moderate, or high risk of getting cancer. Now, who should take a hereditary cancer risk test? Now, when there is a case of cancer in your family, when more than one member in your family has same type of cancer, or more than one member in the same side of your family has different type of cancer, or if there is a known history of a BRCA1 or 2 mutation in your family. Talking about ovarian cancer, I think according to recent NCCN guidelines, this has undergone a little bit of change. In my opinion, every case of high-grade serous ovarian cancer should undergo a BRCA testing. Again, triple negative breast cancers, one should go for a BRCA testing as well. Now, why this is important? Now, as I told you, why we are talking about all of these BRCA testing. Now, suppose a patient comes to me and says that, doctor, why should I do a BRCA testing? Now, 3 to 4 years before, we used to only say that for you, there is no use, but maybe it will help your generations, your children and their generations, so that we can suggest them some measures by which these can be prevented. But since the last 2 to 3 years, there has been some excellent trials in ovarian cancer, especially the PARP inhibitors, mainly the olaparib and the rucaparib, which have shown excellent survival in patients who have BRCA mutations, the BRCA1 and 2 mutations. And these are available in tablet form. They are available as a maintenance therapy. So you don't have to take injections like what other chemotherapeutic drugs can take. And overall, the data from the SOLO-1 and SOLO-2 studies have shown that there is excellent survival. The disease-free survival advantage was up to 3 years in high-grade serous advanced ovarian cancer post-treatment. And so it's very important in today's world that you do these genetic tests in all patients of high-grade serous ovarian cancers. Now, it is also important that you do both the germline test as well as the somatic test, because sometimes your germline mutations might be negative, but your somatic mutations might be positive. So it's important to detect the BRCA mutation, because these patients should not be denied a chance of taking the PARP inhibitors. Now, if you look at familial breast cancer patients, the low susceptibility genes are about 14%. The BRCA family genes are around 51%. And the high susceptibility genes, which is the BRCA and the BRCA2. So 25% of breast cancers, you can say, is because of the high susceptibility genes. Other genes like ATM or RAD50 are about 5%. So majority group is this BRCA1 and 2, which is very, very important. Now, the BRCA X, which is a family, is around 51%. It basically occurs in families which are predictive of a BRCA1 and 2 carrier, but on mutation analysis, no mutation is detected in these patients. Now, what is about somatic or acquired mutation? So how does the mutational process occur? So basically, there is DNA replication because of genotoxins or because of DNA repair deficiency, which is mainly the factor in the PARP inhibitors or in the BRCA mutations, or DNA editing, All of these leads to either a small mutations or structural variations and copy number variations. And all of these causes a somatic mutation. Now, when a mutation is acquired only in lifetime, and as I have already said, it is only present in the tumor cells, that is the mutated or the affected cells only. And either mutations can be in the form of either deletions or copy number variations, and they are essentially non-hereditary in number. Now, the somatic causing mutations are present in more than 95% of population. Now, the traditional sequencing assays are quite time consuming. You need to one needs to undergo multiple individual assays, which are obviously going to take more time, and also all of these means that your cost increases. So and the results can be variable, and there can be a loss of precious samples. See, for example, technically, if you are doing a tumor biopsy and you have taken a good sample and you send for all these tests, and suppose at the end of all these tests you don't get any results, so that would mean that you will need to repeat a biopsy. So that will again involve discomfort to the patient, and again it will involve an extra cost. So where do we stand today in terms of somatic cancer testing? Now, in the early 2000s or in the last decade, we usually used to check only single gene, but now there is a disease specific hotspot panel, which is definitely used in the last decade. Now we have something called as a comprehensive genomic profiling. So we exactly can study the entire genome. We hope that in the future there will be an exome, genome, transcriptome, and obviously the future is multi-omics. Now there is an increased demand of genomic information in a single test and constant cost, and a decrease of sequencing leading to adoption of multi-gene tests in clinical practice is something which is very, very important. Now, what is the clinical utility of the NGS-based comprehensive genomic profiling of cancer? Now, so you mean that you can detect all the DNA variants in a single test, either the RNA variants and the signatures as well. So you can either the splice variants or the fusions, then the deletions, all can be detected by a comprehensive genomic profiling. So all of this means that you require less tissue. It also saves time as compared to sequential testing. It is very cost effective. So that is something which is very, very important, because again, in India, 70% of patients still pay out of their pocket and are not insured. It also means that it helps in taking informed clinical decisions based on the molecular spectrum. It provides new leads and awareness about the enrollment in the ongoing clinical trials, which are all the trials are biomarker driven. And obviously there is a pan-cancer coverage as well. So all in all, it's important that a comprehensive genomic profiling is done. Now, what it means for treatment in oncology, or what it means in precision oncology. Now, the current cancer care is still based on empirical decisions. For example, in cases of colon cancer, there's a particular drug which is given to all patients because we believe that that is given. For example, in now all cases of advanced cervical cancer get cisplatin. All cases of ovarian cancer get paclitaxel carboplatin. But you don't know. For example, there might be a particular patient who might not be responsive or who might be platinum refractory. So that you don't realize at the start. So there will be some patients where there will be effect, some patients who will have a stable disease, and some patients will have maximum adverse effect. So we hope that this is the future. And because of the advanced scientific tools, we can stratify patients and provide evidence-based personalized treatment. So basically, patients with a particular cancer will undergo biomarker genetics. So you will actually know or you will decide which drug is acting better on a particular patient, and so that the patients are unnecessarily not given a drug which is likely to be not so active in that patient. So precision medicine, or as I said, personalized medicine, basically aims at identifying effective treatment strategies for each patient through better characterization of diseases at molecular and pharmacogenetic levels. So in and all, it's important that all cases of ovarian cancer, especially the high-grade serous ones, are offered genetic testing. Genetic testing should be in the form of both germline mutations and somatic mutations as well. And so that is what I wanted to stress, that genetic testing is very, very important in today's practice, especially when you are dealing with ovarian cancer patients. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. I would be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful lecture. And there were a lot of insights in the discussion that in the teaching that you had today. There are a couple of questions from the attendees. Are there many cancer genes which are prominent only in Indian population? Can you let us know if there is any kind of an edge over a frequency or a trend towards a specific genes in Indians as compared to Caucasians, based on your experience?
So I can talk about breast and ovarian cancer. Now, if you look at worldwide data, the incidence of genetic, that is the BRCA mutations in the breast and in the ovarian cancer was around 25%. But if you look at the recent data from a large study from Tata Memorial Center, which was presented at ASCO and which is being published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, the incidence of genetic mutations, or you can say not genetic, I will say genetic and somatic mutations, was around 28 to 30%. So that is much more than what is the world standard. So I think in our population or in Indian population, the incidence of mutations is much more as compared to the West. So that is what is very important especially in deciding our treatment strategies.
Is there any difference between germline mutated HRR genes and somatic mutation causing HRR genes? Is there any change in treatment if the patient is germline HRR or somatic HRR?
No, in today's world, according to whatever data is available, irrespective of whether it's a germline or a somatic mutation, we take it as a BRCA positive or a negative, and we do offer them PARP inhibitors. So there is no difference.
Can you elaborate a bit on how genetic testing of somatic mutations influences the course of treatment? Yes,
so that's a very important question. For example, if we send a tumor for tissue, the lab runs a NGS-based test to detect BRCA1 and 2 genes. Now, if the BRCA1 and 2 genes are positive, that means the patient has a BRCA gene mutation. Now, that is very important. It has both prognostic as well as therapeutic implications. Now, one is the family needs to undergo a testing because there is a risk that he's talking about the somatic, right?
Yes, sir. Can you please elaborate?
So somatic basically so these patients can be definitely offered PARP inhibitors as in the maintenance setting once their treatment is completed. Like, for example, if the patient has had a combination of surgery. Now in ovarian cancer, you always need, in advanced ovarian cancer, there is always a combination of surgery and chemotherapy. So once the patient has finished the treatment, then they should be subjected to a maintenance therapy with either of the PARP inhibitors.
Do personalized healthcare have any ethical concerns?
See, as of now, there is no evidence that there is. As of now, what we are doing is one size fits all, because we are not basing our treatments on. See, we are not doing a biopsy or an NGS in all patients at the start. So as of now, in today's world, yes, there will be some ethical concerns because there is no evidence, and evidence is in the form of either randomized controlled trials or meta-analysis. So as of now, we are primarily basing our NGS-based treatments only in the recurrent setting. So probably in today's world, there will be some ethical concerns regarding offering patients upfront treatment based on NGS only.
In germline BRCA if germline BRCA mutations are absent in a population, what other genes might play a role? In case few polymorphisms are also present, but there are no pathogenic mutations.
Yeah, so there is something called as VUS, or variants of uncertain significance. So there are sometimes you get reports that there might be some genes. Probably we don't know the significance of these genes now, But maybe in the future, if more and more targeted therapies develop, then there might be some drugs which might target these therapies, these genes, and so then it might have a role in the future treatments as well.
And so someone has said it is a very informative session. Thank you for the session. And can you just give a brief about exome versus transcriptome sequencing in identifying somatic mutations?
No, I think that is a technical question which I think you only have to answer. That's a little
too very technical for a clinical person perspective.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't.
No problem, sir. So we can take this offline also.
Yes.
Having said that, a simple answer would be when we are looking at FFP tissue, there is a very high chance of RNA degradation during the processing of tissue for FFP block preparation. So we might miss somatic mutations on a transcriptome data. So, but then the chances of missing somatic mutations on a exome data from an FFP tissue is very, very, it's quite insignificant considering that there are no other challenges or other tissue related artifacts in FFP tissue block formation. So if you want to have mutations assessed on a transcriptome sequencing data, the ideal sample type would be a fresh tissue. Having said this, if you identify a mutation in an exome, you are looking at the mutation or the change that has happened at the DNA level. But when you are identifying a mutation at the transcriptome level, it is already mRNA. That means the functional protein is pretty much going to get produced. So what it says is you have already reached the next level of information, that the mutation is already getting transcribed to make the functional protein. Particularly if we are looking for mutation that causes an oncogenic activation, that you are kind of more or less quite sure if you identify mutations in a transcriptome that this is the kind of the workhorse for the cancer cell to proliferate. So examples of these somatic mutations would be like ALK and ROS fusions, which we identify in RNA as compared to DNA, is more, it gives us more confidence that it is the driver mutation, and then the concordance level will be very high as compared to the DNA level analysis for these translocations or gene fusions. Can hereditary cancer be tested using somatic test? Please elaborate.
No. So as I said, somatic is something which occurs in the particular individual. It is not going to be transmitted from one generation to another. As I said, these mutations are present only in the affected tumor cells. So that mutation will not be there in a healthy carrier or in a healthy person. Now, if you want to test a heritable mutation, you need to check what is a germline mutation. So you need to test blood. As I said, a germline mutation is present in all the body tissues, like all the cells in the body. So that is the difference between the two.
So this is a pathology question. So depending on the histopathology or the pattern of the cells, should we ask for a BRCA testing? Like, something like the microsatellite.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think that is something, this is one, you can say one thought process, which has definitely undergone a change. Previously, even the NCCN guidelines for genetic testing were very, very rigid. They would say that either more than 2 family members affected. So the criteria was, so they have just broadened the criteria. Again, now if you look at high-grade serous cancers, the incidence of BRCA mutations are phenomenal. So they might be either be germline mutations or somatic mutations. So I think if you see a high-grade serous ovarian cancer, you should definitely advise both germline as well as somatic testing. Similarly, if there is a triple negative breast cancer, one should definitely advise BRCA testing, because these are common subtypes which are seen in BRCA mutated individuals. Also, now if the MSI is high in cases of colon cancer or in uterine cancer, one should go for MSI testing as well, because they can be a subset of Lynch syndrome. So we think that Lynch syndrome is very rare, but it is not that rare. See, even I have seen 3-4, like one of my patients just last week, we had operated on that lady. She underwent a surgery for endometrial cancer about 5 years back, 4 years back. Now, it was a lady in her 60s. Now, we didn't suspect that she would have had a mutation. Now, after 3 years, she had a colonic growth. And now the MSI is unstable. So there is a mutation in the MSI. So now, retrospectively, I think that she has Lynch syndrome. And so now we are doing testing in all her family members. So though we say that if somebody has had a uterine cancer very early in life or colon cancer very early in life, only they should go for genetic testing. But I think it may not occur in all patients in an early age group.
Can you give other cancer examples for somatic mutation and NGS-based testing? It's a very broad question. Can you give other cancer examples for somatic mutation and NGS-based testing?
No, that is
yeah. Also, can you shed some light on screening for cancers as a result of positive germline mutation?
Yes. Yes, this is very important. See, because though now this is a very important, you can say a very social issue, as well as you need to tackle this a little more sensitively. Now, I'll tell you a practical example. There's a lady who is 50 years old who has a high-grade serous carcinoma of ovary or a triple negative breast cancer. She comes to you, she's undergone treatment, you do a genetic test, and the BRCA comes positive. Now she has 2 daughters. Now it is very important that these daughters are tested. Now it is very important that a proper genetic counseling is done of these patients, especially the healthy individuals. That why is the genetic testing done, and what are the implications if the test is positive? What are the implications if the test is negative? Now you need to tell her that if the test is negative, then your risk of breast and ovarian cancer is not 0. It is the same as that of general population. So you should follow the same screening guidelines what the general population is following. Now, if your BRCA1 or 2 is positive, then it definitely increases your risk of breast cancer as well as ovarian cancer. Now, what are the different you can say risk reducing strategies which are available for ovarian cancer? Definitely, there is a role of doing a prophylactic salpingo-oophorectomy after the age of 35 or after the age of 40. That reduces the risk of the lady getting ovarian cancer by about 96%. That is something which is very, very important. For breast cancer, there is also an option of doing a prophylactic mastectomy, though that's a little difficult to accept in the population. But then there is also an option of doing a yearly mammography and alternating with a breast MRI. So that is how you need to counsel them as far as the follow-up of BRCA positive healthy individuals is concerned.
Sir, in case it was detected very early stage and they went for a lumpectomy or something of that sort and did not go for mastectomy, there are few studies which says that the overall survival is not very different between a mastectomy and a lumpectomy if the sentinel lymph nodes are negative.
Yes. Yes.
So when if it is a BRCA carrier and you went and the patient had gone through this kind of a lumpectomy and there is still a fear in the patient, what is your call? In the first go itself, it has to go for a mastectomy?
No. So as you know, our surgeries are going from being more and more radical to less and less radical, more and more organ preservation. So as far as the BRCA mutation is concerned, that is not going to guide our what is the surgery which is going to be done. It is going to be based only on the mammography findings or the imaging findings. Now, if there is a single nodule and your surgeon is confident that you will get a negative margin and your sentinel nodes show that the axillary nodes are negative, then there is no need of going for a mastectomy in case you have a BRCA positive mutation. But there is also one school of thought that if you have had a breast cancer at that time, then and you are BRCA positive, then and suppose you opt for a double mastectomy, then there is also an option of going for a double mastectomy at that time.
So it is completely patient's call?
Yes, absolutely. It is. Yeah, I mean, see, you need to tell the patient the options. You need to tell them that your risk is going to be reduced to a certain extent with doing a prophylactic mastectomy versus not doing a prophylactic mastectomy. So, and then ultimately it's a decision which the patient needs to take an informed choice.
Okay. And another concern with respect to the BRCA mutation, women who is a BRCA carrier and who has children who are less than the age of 80. So there are certain ethical guidelines that suggest that you should not get the testing done or for the germline mutations in the young children. So in the clinic, how do you face it? Like when women come with this kind of a predisposition, what is the challenges that you face as a clinician?
Yes, so that's a very tricky situation. You see, when especially we encounter these sorts of problems year and year. So there are also other social issues also. See, they say that whether my daughter will get married or no. So what should we do? Should we tell the groom or no? So as of now, I tell them that though I don't advocate a genetic testing less than 18 years of age, because it's not that we are going to do anything about it. But after 18, I do give them an option of getting genetic testing. I tell them what is the fact that there is a certain risk, and we can suggest measures by which this can be prevented. So most of the times, patients do accept to do genetic tests. So at the end of the day, it's the patient's call, but I don't advocate it under 18 years.
But if it is a patient's call, with the consent of the patient, you would I mean, if the patient is like desperately.
Yes. So we believe that in India, 16 is an age, or 15 is an age where the patient can, the young girl can give a consent, can understand things. And if they understand, then one can go for it. There is no contraindication to do it. But as a practice, I don't advocate it. But if the family is quite keen, one can do it.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. And another question, it's more to do with insurance. I don't know, do insurance companies provide support to the patients for NGS testing? Do the physicians have a flexibility to prescribe drugs that are non-SOC but have shown the effect on a certain indication?
See, as of now, in today's, as far as the insurance is concerned, I don't think I'm the right person to answer. So it depends upon what insurance you have, and it depends upon what are the terms and conditions. So as far as the second question is concerned, see, in today's world, we cannot prescribe a drug where because you feel that it will work. Anything that you do, any treatments that you prescribe has to be substantiated by credible medical evidence. And evidence, as I said, is in the form of randomized controlled trials or meta-analysis. Now, in certain situations, especially in recurrent cancers or in very, very rare cancers, there is a lack of evidence. So in that situation, there is a possibility that you can explain the risk to the patient and then prescribe the drug, if suppose there is no other option.
And there you would take the consent from the patient,
Yes,
that with the
absolutely.
willingness of the
Yes,
patient,
yes,
you are going
yes,
further.
yes, yes, absolutely. That is something which is absolutely important.
So there's another very classical question. It says, is it okay to sequence and analyze only BRCA and BRCA1 and 2 genes for a decision on a treatment in a patient who is having breast or an ovarian cancer, but she has a family history of other cancers along with breast and ovarian?
In a situation where there is a strong history of other cancers, I would definitely go for a complete sequencing than just doing BRCA or BRCA1 or 2. Now, to be frank, see, as of now, we have treatment modalities only if somebody has a BRCA1 or 2 positive. So doing a complete sequencing may not make a difference now, but we don't know what is the future. In a situation where there is a strong family history of, say, a colon cancer or certain other cancers, I would definitely go for advocate for a complete sequencing in this case, at least.
What are the advantages of comprehensive genomic profiling over an exome sequencing?
That is in the slide. It's especially time consuming, less time consuming, less costly, and the tumor tissue. See, it's very important that you understand that when you send the tumor tissue, you are doing an invasive procedure. You are either doing a biopsy, so now that can be a CT scan guided or a laparoscopy guided. So it involves that the patient has to be under anesthesia, and there is a certain amount of pain also which might come. So you should aim that whatever tissue you have got, you should aim to use it for maximum benefit. So that is what I feel an NGS test does, because the amount of tissue which is required is less, and you get the result in one test. So ultimately the cost also reduces, and you can say the trouble to the patient is also minimum.
There's another important question here. For instance, when there is a germline testing that turns out to be negative in a hereditary cancer, should the patient undergo a somatic test as well?
In an unaffected, you're telling about an unaffected patient or an affected patient?
Looks like it's an affected patient.
So affected, that's why I said, see, all mutations are not going to be picked up in germline. So it's important that, especially in a high-grade serous variety of ovarian cancer or a triple negative variety of breast cancer, or for that matter, see, sometimes the BRCA mutations can also be seen in mucinous cancers as well. One of my patients with a recurrent mucinous cancer does have a BRCA somatic mutation. Now, that is why it is very important that you test both germline and somatic for all patients, irrespective of anything.
There's another interesting question. If an individual with ovarian cancer and a positive status for a germline BRCA had sons, will her sons also manifest other cancer types with BRCA mutation?
Yes, they can have other cancer. So it's important that they are also tested, and if they are positive, then prophylactic measures can be suggested to them.
So in men, the prophylactic measures are primarily for the prostate.
Absolutely, prostate and sarcomas, the incidence is increased, and obviously male breast cancer has an increased risk because of BRCA2, especially because of BRCA2 mutation.
So this is a very it's a tangential question, but how does mitochondrial mutation drive cancers? I think that we will take it offline. Who should test for germline and somatic genes together?
Yes.
What problems do you face for implementing this test in Indian patients? Does it hinder your treatment planning ahead of time, or what are the challenges that you come across?
Yeah, so challenges basically in Indian population, as I said, is primarily the cost. As I said, 70% of patients still pay out of their pocket. So, and second thing is, I think, awareness. So previously, as I said, that the patient would ask, see, I am doing the genetic test, but what is it going to benefit me? So we didn't have any answer for that. But now there is definitely an answer because of development of PARP inhibitors. You can tell her that this will influence your treatment decisions as well. So I think awareness is very, very important in oncologists to do genetic testing, and it should be made, it should be emphasized that there is a certain percentage of mutations which you will miss if you do only germline mutation. So it's important to test both germline and somatic. So I think the primarily hurdles are the cost, and second is probably awareness.
What is the prevalence of breast cancer in Indian men?
It's about around less than 5%, I would suggest. I would say.
Are there common mutations that are found both in males and females with breast cancer?
Yeah, so BRCA2 is both in men and women. BRCA1, a very, very small, very, very minute percentage can be in men as well. But BRCA2 is common in both men and women, breast cancer.
This is another very technical question. Does germline mutations be identified only in blood? For instance, if we identify a mutation in a patient's tissue, how we can differentiate as it is somatic or germline?
I don't think it will make a difference in the treatment planning. If it's a mutation, it's a mutation, whether it's a germline or a somatic. I don't think it will influence the treatment decision.
But I think the person who is asking this question is concerned with respect to the additional family members. What if it turns out to be germline?
No. So you have to take which is the worst possibility and take it as a germline mutation and test for the family members as well. And it is always some over investigation is always better than under investigation.
PARP inhibitors are given irrespective. Are these PARP inhibitors given irrespective of germline or somatic?
Yeah, so they did a trial where in HRR negative patients they looked at the effect of PARP inhibitor. Though initial assessment was thought that the PARP inhibitors would benefit in that subset as well, but unfortunately the benefits were not that great as compared to BRCA positive individuals. So as of now in our practice, we are offering it only to BRCA positive individuals or BRCA mutated individuals. Primarily because it still is a costly drug. And second is that the trial did not show a significant survival advantage as what was shown in the BRCA positive individuals.
There is another person who's asking a question. Does germline mutations be cured or prevented by personalized care if it is detected in early ages of life? Desperate question, actually.
I don't know.
It's actually a very desperate question, sir, because the mutation is there and you want to eradicate from every cell from the body, actually. So it's, I don't know, very early stages means only you have an embryo selection that can happen nowadays.
Correct. So that is what I was going to talk about it. There is some role of whether we can do an embryo selection, that is to test BRCA in the embryo. And if it is there, then you can do a selection. But then again, it comes, the PCP comes in the purview of PCP Entity Act, because that would mean revealing the sex of the fetus. So which is probably, I don't know if it is legal or in India. It is still not legal in India. But
sir, without revealing that, because these genes, they are not going to connect with the gender.
Yes, right. Yeah. So maybe that could have a role. I mean, especially if you are in a pre-implantation genetic analysis, if that can be done in a BRCA mutated individual, then definitely that can have value.
So there's another question here. They're asking, in a country like India, getting personalized treatment, what are the chances of people getting access to that long and expensive treatment? What is your perspective on this personalized treatment?
So I think the answer for a country like India is probably more coverage of health insurance, where more and more people get access to the affordable treatments. And if more and more people have insurance, then obviously the premiums will also come down, and thus it will make treatment affordable for all. So that is what is, and we are going towards personalized medicine. And if you see 5 years from now, as I said, one size will not fit all, and you need to treat every patient of an X cancer, say of a colon cancer, differently from a Y patient.
There's another question. You get multiple driver mutations during multiple mutations when you
Okay.
do a tumor profiling due to heterogeneity.
Okay.
How do you handle the treatment? Because you get this answer when you do an NGS, because you're
Yes.
doing a multi-gene
Right.
panel. How do you
Right.
go by handling the treatment?
So so this situation will occur most of the times only in the recurrent cancer. So we will obviously select the drug where the evidence is much more robust than the other drug. So if probably there are say 3 or 4 mutations and all of them have targeted therapies which are approved by FDA against them, so we will obviously select the drug where the evidence is much more. Like for example, there is a BRCA mutation and there is a RAD51 mutation, so which has probably some XYZ drug against it. So I will always go with the PARP inhibitor because there is robust evidence for it.
Okay. When there is a choice between chemotherapy and targeted therapy options, then which one would you prefer, sir?
No, yeah.
Like you got the
Yes.
answer from NGS.
Yes.
And you also know that this patient is in the first line or second line. Ideally, by the standard of care guidelines, probably that patient is supposed to be given some chemo combination as per the textbook. So how do we handle this kind of cases then?
Yeah, so as of now, see, there is, we are not basing our upfront treatment plans on the NGS. So mainly NGS is mainly doing at recurrent cases where we have sort of exhausted our primary lines of treatment. So as of now, say for example, in tomorrow in an ovarian cancer, if I send an upfront NGS and it says that it is sensitive to say mitomycin, but we don't give them mitomycin based on that. We still go with paclitaxel carboplatin because that is a standard of care, and for that there is evidence. But maybe going down the line, if there is robust evidence which is developed for these type of personalized medicine, then yes, we might change and give mitomycin upfront itself. So that is what it can boil down to.
I think we are complete. There are some very generic questions. When there is a tinnitus induced by road injury, does it create a germline or a somatic mutation?
I don't think there is.
There is nobody would have researched on that to understand. Unless somebody do it at the research level, you never know what a road injury would lead to a mutation, and that may also take years to acquire. Even if it was to be a mutation.
Yes, absolutely.
So I guess we are complete with most of the questions. We have addressed most of it from what has come out from the Q&A box as well as in the chat. So we thank you, sir, once again for this your time that you have given for this lecture. And I'm sure we have got many appreciations for this wonderful lecture on NGS, BRCA and HRR mutations. You have given a fundamental knowledge on genetics also. I think there are many clinicians, not just from India, it's also from several countries across Southeast Asia and Europe, as well as in the United States, who are part of the session today. And many patient families also would have been there. And I thank you for your time, for explaining with a lot of patience all these questions that has been raised. And we also thank all the attendees here from India and abroad. There are many clinicians, practicing clinicians. They want to understand how Indian in Indian scenario, how the clinicians are managing their patients. That probably helps to know how to take it in the other side. Okay, there's another quick question, sir. It's a very important question. Do you think the LOH score and the telomere length have any clinical implications when considering HRR deficient cancer or the analysis of HRR genes itself is enough to take the right
Probably.
treatment decision?
I am not the right person to answer this. For me, mutation is a mutation, and I would be more than happy to guide the treatment based on that mutation.
Okay. Yeah. So this is in the context of the FDA approved Myriad test. That's what they're asking for.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that is also one change which has occurred. Like if you look at 10 years back, we had, the test was so expensive. If you tell somebody that you are going to know your genetic risk and that is going to cost you around 2 lakh rupees. So the reach of the test is very, very low, what I would suggest. So we are in fact fortunate that there are many laboratories now in India which are doing this test at very, very affordable rates. And I think our accuracy is pretty good. So from what is my experience in clinical practice. So I think we should trust our own laboratories. Though I definitely Foundation One and Myriad is a gold standard, because all the definitely all the trials, the Solo One and all the trials of the PARP inhibitors have also done, the analysis was done in the Myriad laboratories only. But we have to look at the real world scenario,
which is affordable in the patients.
Yes,
in the
absolutely,
context.
absolutely, yeah.
I think we are done with this. Thank you, sir, once again.
Thank you
for this evening lecture. And thank you all the attendees, and good evening, and have a nice weekend to all of you.
Yes. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and I thank all the attendees and all the organizing people from 4BaseCS, and thank you, Dr. Vidya. I really enjoyed the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.